The American Revolution stands as a pivotal moment in history, a beacon of liberty that illuminated the path toward self-determination. It was a struggle born not of sudden impulse but of deep-seated grievances and evolving ideologies. To truly understand this revolution, we must journey back to its roots, to a time when the seeds of discontent were sown in the fertile ground of colonial America. The relationship between Great Britain and her American colonies was, for a time, one of relative harmony. The British Crown exercised a light touch on colonial affairs, a policy known as salutary neglect. This era of autonomy allowed the colonies to flourish, developing their own governments, economies, and sense of identity. However, this period of peaceful coexistence was not to last. The winds of change began to blow across the Atlantic, carrying with them the storm clouds of conflict. During the 17th and early 18th centuries, the British government adopted a policy of salutary neglect towards its American colonies. This approach, characterized by a relaxed enforcement of trade regulations and a degree of self-governance, allowed the colonies to prosper with minimal interference from the mother country. Colonial assemblies held considerable power, levying taxes, enacting laws, and managing local affairs. This era of autonomy fostered a sense of independence and self-reliance among the colonists. Accustomed to governing themselves, they developed unique identities and traditions distinct from those of their British counterparts. The vast Atlantic Ocean served as a buffer, further reinforcing this sense of separation. However, the seeds of future conflict were sown within this very autonomy. As the colonies grew in wealth and population, so too did their sense of self-importance and their desire for greater control over their own destinies. The stage was set for a clash of ideologies. The year 1754 marked a turning point in the relationship between Great Britain and her American colonies. The outbreak of the French and Indian War, a conflict rooted in territorial disputes between the European powers, drew both sides into a costly and bloody struggle. The war raged for 9 long years, leaving Britain deeply in debt and questioning the cost of maintaining its vast empire. The conflict had a profound impact on the colonies as well. Colonial militias, fighting alongside British regulars, gained valuable military experience and developed a sense of unity and shared purpose. The war also shattered the illusion of colonial security, exposing the colonies to the constant threat of French and Native American incursions. In the aftermath of victory, Britain, burdened by war debts, looked to its colonies to share the financial burden. This marked a decisive shift in British policy, away from salutary neglect and towards a more assertive and controlling approach. The conclusion of the French and Indian War ushered in an era of heightened tensions between Great Britain and its American colonies. Seeking to replenish its depleted coffers and assert greater control over colonial affairs, the British Parliament enacted a series of revenue-raising measures that ignited colonial resistance. These acts, rooted in the principle of parliamentary supremacy, were met with fierce opposition in the colonies, where the cry of "No Taxation Without Representation" became a rallying cry for those who resented British attempts to impose their will upon them. At the heart of the colonist grievances lay a fundamental principle of British common law, the right to be taxed only by one's own consent. The colonists argued that, as they had no elected representatives in Parliament, they could not be subjected to taxes levied without their consent. This principle, enshrined in the Magna Carta and other foundational documents of English liberty, became a cornerstone of colonial resistance. To the colonists, British actions represented a betrayal of their rights as Englishmen and a threat to their hard-won freedoms. Section 5. The Stamp Act, Igniting the Flames of Resistance. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, a seemingly minor tax on paper goods that ignited a firestorm of protest throughout the colonies. The act required colonists to purchase special stamped paper for a wide range of printed materials, including newspapers, pamphlets, legal documents, and even playing cards. This direct tax, levied without colonial consent, struck at the heart of colonial liberties and galvanized resistance against British rule. Colonial leaders, outraged by what they perceived as an infringement on their rights, organized boycotts of British goods and staged public demonstrations. The Sons of Liberty, a secret society dedicated to opposing British policies, emerged as a powerful force in this growing resistance movement. From Massachusetts to Georgia, colonists united in their opposition to the Stamp Act, forcing the British government to eventually repeal the act in 1766. The repeal, however, was a hollow victory, as Parliament simultaneously passed the Declaratory Act, asserting its right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Section 6. The Townshend Acts and the Tea Act, fueling the fire. Undeterred by colonial resistance to the Stamp Act, the British Parliament, under the leadership of Charles Townshend, sought new ways to assert its authority and generate revenue from the colonies. In 1767, Parliament passed the Townshend Acts, a series of acts that levied taxes on imported goods such as tea, glass, lead, and paint. These indirect taxes, collected at colonial ports, were designed to be less objectionable than the direct taxes imposed by the Stamp Act. However, the colonists, ever wary of British intentions, saw through this thinly veiled attempt to circumvent their rights. They argued that any tax levied without their consent, direct or indirect, was a violation of their fundamental liberties. The Townshend Acts reignited colonial resistance, leading to renewed boycotts of British goods and heightened tensions between the colonies and the mother country. The stage was set for further conflict as neither side seemed willing to back down. The Tea Act of 1773, while seemingly a measure intended to aid the struggling East India Company, further inflamed colonial passions. By granting the company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies, the act undercut colonial merchants and reinforced the principle of taxation without representation. This act, seen as a deliberate attempt to undermine colonial businesses and assert British control, proved to be a fateful miscalculation, leading directly to the iconic act of defiance known as the Boston Tea Party. Section 7. The Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, Acts of Defiance. As tensions escalated between Great Britain and its American colonies, two pivotal events occurred in Boston, forever etching the city into the annals of revolutionary history. The first, the Boston Massacre of 1770, transformed a street brawl between colonists and British soldiers into a symbol of British oppression. When British troops fired upon a crowd of unarmed colonists, killing 5, the incident sent shockwaves throughout the colonies, fueling anti-British sentiment and solidifying colonial unity against what they perceived as a tyrannical government. 3 years later, in December 1773, the Boston Tea Party became a resounding declaration of colonial defiance. A group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships docked in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water, protesting the Tea Act and its implications for colonial liberties. This brazen act of defiance, a direct challenge to British authority, served as a catalyst for revolution, pushing the two sides closer to the brink of war. Section 8. The Enlightenment and the Power of Ideas. The American Revolution was not merely a conflict over taxes and trade, it was a revolution fueled by ideas. The 18th century witnessed the rise of the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement that emphasized reason, individual rights, and the right to revolution against tyrannical governments. These ideas, disseminated through pamphlets, newspapers, and passionate discourse, found fertile ground in the American colonies where they resonated deeply with the colonists' own experiences and aspirations. No single work of literature had a more profound impact on the revolutionary cause than Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in January 1776. Paine's fiery prose challenged the legitimacy of the British monarchy and argued forcefully for independence, galvanizing public opinion and swaying many toward the cause of revolution. Common Sense provided the intellectual framework for independence, articulating the colonists' grievances and aspirations in a language that resonated with the common man. Section 9. The Declaration of Independence, a nation forged in liberty. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress, assembled in Philadelphia, took the momentous step of declaring the American colonies independent from Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence, penned primarily by Thomas Jefferson, stands as a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the unyielding human spirit in the face of tyranny. This document, a beacon of liberty for generations to come, proclaimed to the world the birth of a new nation, founded on the principles of self-governance, individual rights, and equality. The Declaration of Independence was more than just a declaration of war. It was a declaration of principles. It laid out the philosophical underpinnings of the new nation, drawing heavily on Enlightenment ideals. It asserted that all men are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It argued that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, and that the people have a right to alter or abolish any government that becomes destructive of these ends.